Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. And welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa, where it's 7 p.m. for me in the evening. So I always say good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the beautiful world you are. And I know it's morning time for you, Leo. So, yeah. And probably the rest of the
9 o'clock, not 7, but 9 o'clock in the morning. Yes. So we're getting up here. We're getting up here in sunny.
Are you still yawning? I've had a good day already. So it's a good day. We've paved the way for you Americans, right? Us here in Africa, we've paved the way.
I actually get up very early. I get up around 5 o'clock and try to be up and running by 6:30, so I can produce my work, because otherwise, with all this time difference occurring also with Europe, and which is something I follow very closely, it's kind of difficult for me. So I tend to wake up very early, and of course waking up very early means also going to bed very early. But I guess that this is a kind of a time difference from my old days when I used to be a DJ and a record producer, which I used to go to bed at 6 o'clock in the morning rather than.
I think, funny, I was thinking today, you mentioned when you used to be a DJ and a record producer. And I remember on the first show I did with you, we kind of delved a little bit into your past. But you haven't really told us so much about your past.
I actually started with Catholic radio. So I started within the Vatican. I started because my mother was working with the Vatican radio and TV. And at that time, it was the late 70s. A lot of radios and TVs were being created. And this prominent priest who later would become in charge of the Episcopal Conference official TV station, which is SAT 2000. He established this now prestigious and known TV station for the Vatican. He started his own project, and I was there actually at 10 years old with my mother, and he noticed me and he said, "Okay, will you like to read some children fairy tales with other children here in the studio?" And so I actually started when I was 10, reading fairy tales for children. And but I wanted to do something more. I was inspired one day by these DJs I saw in a village setup who were DJing in like an open party in the piazza there of the village. And so then I wanted to be a DJ. So I went to the priest who used to work with my mother, because my mother was doing her own radio show every Monday for the Catholics. She was very popular back then. So I said, "Well, I would like to do a radio show myself." He said, "Well, you're too young, but if you serve in church as a altar boy for a few years, maybe we can consider it." So I had to serve as an altar boy for 3 years. And then eventually I got my first radio show, which ended up being a success, but also quite scandalous right at the beginning, because I immediately received a call from the bishop who said I was playing Frankie Goes to Hollywood Relax, and that was not proper. So I was reprimanded right at the start of my DJ career. But later on, after a couple of years, I was noticed by the opposite faction, the socialists, who wanted me on their radio. So when I was 16, I started to work with a socialist radio. And at the same time, though, the Vatican priest, which is very known to the media, is called Monsignor Mario Pieracci. He's a very known media personality of the Vatican. He said, "Leo, well, we would like to have you also on TV." So I said, "Now that you are becoming more and more popular on the radio scene," because at that point I was getting more and more radios, already 16 years old, but I was networking more and more radios to broadcast my show. So he said, "No, we would like to on TV." So at that point, I went on to do also my own TV show. It was the time in which MTV was very popular and stuff. So I wanted to do something a little bit like MTV, but at the same time, I wanted to go in the streets and interview people and ask the ordinary man in the streets what he thought about all these videos and stuff. So it was an unusual show. It went on for 92 episodes. It was very successful. In fact, the Vatican kept on running it even many years after I stopped working with them. and they have it in the archives together with John Paul II's videos. So I'm kind of like next to him in this.
That's amazing. But now I'm interested to know what type of music and what type of DJing were you doing? I mean, if it was in the Vatican, I would imagine
music, I would say
Catholic hymns. I would imagine it's all Catholic hymns.
No, absolutely not. I learned a lot from their way of manipulating the propaganda and everything, because they teach me really trickery. I mean, right from the start. I mean, at one point I was also in charge of. I was learning how to be a cameraman in a church, and always pointing on the first 2 or 3 pews, because otherwise it would be empty, the church. So you had to pretend it was filled. Or when you were broadcasting these masses, you had like a pre-recorded mass filled with people, so to make it look like there was a lot of people. It was all fake, but it was part of the. So I learned there was a lot of trickery involved in that. But no, my show was actually inspired by the American radios, because I had a friend of my father who was a popular bass player in a very famous Italian band. He used to bring me all this. He was actually English, and he used to bring me all these tapes from America. So from Philly 99 FM, WBLS in New York, and all that. So I was like mimicking those kind of radios in Italy. And that was what brought me to my immediate success, because I filled up. I was working with a clock, which was not used by independent or private radios at the time. So that means basically every 15 minutes you have maybe a jingle, you have the publicity, everything goes. Every radio in Italy started to become a clock radio using this method after 1990, but this was the early 80s. So I then went to England, got some jingles done by these famous American voices and stuff. So my show was like pretty modern, and the music was, I was inspired by this mainly black radios, but I was mixing them in with what was known as the British Invasion. So it was electro, hip hop, early hip hop mixed in with new wave. It was kind of like, and then of course, electro became more and more close to what we call now house music around 1986. And that was when I started to work in clubs. And soon after, thanks to my grandmother in London, I got a break in one of the most popular clubs at the time. It was called Legends in Bond Street. All the famous people used to go there, Simple Minds, Rolling Stones. And so I started to play this house music, because house music at the time was only played in Manchester. I was one of the first clubs in London. And so I became very popular, but I had to go back to school. That was one of the, it was the deal. My grandmother would maybe help me out, but I still had to go back to school. So I went back to school, but I was continuing my radio shows with more and more success. I was working in clubs in Italy. And around 18, I completely broke up with whatever school I was doing, because I wasn't interested. I said later on I will continue my study, but now I have to focus on this. I was earning maybe $5,000 to $10,000 a month. So I said to my parents, you can basically, I threatened them. I said, you can go fuck yourself if you don't give me the possibility to continue with my career, because I'm earning more money than you will ever earn. So that was my and then of course I was involved with the very start of the rave scene, and I started to work for national radios and stuff. So then it became a job, and but at the same time, of course, I wanted to go back to study. But my studies also, I was not willing to go with the system. One of the reasons when I went to my father and I said, listen, I'm terminating my studies now, was like, I noticed that it was very political, that the professors were very left-wing, and all that was not really going down very well with me, because I had already an understanding of politics. My grandfather had been a senator, my father was a psychiatrist, but I was from my grandfather, who was actually a guy quite right-wing. He had been working with Mussolini, the fascist. I didn't want, and then later on he was part of the monarchic party. I didn't want to really, let's say, deal with people who were left-wing. Plus, these professors knew who was my grandfather, knew who was my father, and because of that, they wanted to punish me. They wanted to really punish me. That was an injustice. They were like, making me terribly questions. They will just give me bad votes. So at one point I said, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. So I go to the guy who is in charge of the school, and he was, though, a priest who was connected with the guy who used to run the radio and the TV, because he said to me, well, I understand your position, but so he made me, he kind of let me off the hook for a few things. But once he was removed as head of the school, and this other guy came in who was a former priest, and he was a complete leftist. Well, at that point, not that the other priest wasn't a leftist, because he was very kind of priest, catto-communist, let's say. In fact, he was one of the guys who invented this word, catto-communist. But I just said, listen, guys, at that point, I'm no longer interested in dealing with these people. I will eventually change. And so I changed after. And I went to also study dubbing for movies, which is something I did for a period of time. I studied acting. So I did a few things. And I studied the French in the French Academy. I did a few things. But at the same time, like I said, I carried on with my passion for music that led me to become also a record producer. And so from the early 90s onwards, I was really involved professionally. And then later on, of course, I moved out of Italy back to what used to be the town I always used to be involved with music with, which was London, because I'm half English. So from 1994 onwards, I moved to London. But before that, of course, I was initiated into Freemasonry in 1993. So then I had a complete change of the worldview and what was the whole setup of things, because I started to, of course, being involved with Operation Gladio when I was in the military, and so I already saw certain things. But later on, I was also involved with Freemasonry, so that gave me an ulterior view of things. And then later on, at that point, it was a completely different world we were living in. Russia, the Soviet Union was finished, so they gave me the possibility to start DJing in Russia, and I started working in Russia, and I actually started working with the Ministry of Culture in Russia. I even was the first DJ, I think, in history and probably even the only one to DJ at the Bolshoi Theater. And I met Vladimir Putin in the afternoon, went to his dad. So let's say that I started working very much with the Russian Federation for a period of time, and that was also highly successful. But at the same time, I was working in London. My music was broadcast by the BBC. But when it comes to Russia, it wasn't only, and also other places, it wasn't not only about the music. I was doing, for example, in Iceland, I participated to a show, which a guy later became the mayor of Reykjavik, with two comedians. We used to do a radio show in Reykjavik, in Iceland, with two comedians, and we used to call, like, for example, the White House or important places around the world and make jokes all the time. And there was the most demented jokes, and broadcast them live on national radio in Iceland. It was like, so my experience in radio and the media is a very extensive one, to say the least.
I find that so interesting, when you talk about your beginnings from being a child, literally reading fairy tales in the Catholic Church, to becoming this music producer.
Well, if people want to see about my music production, they can simply go on Discogs. Leo Young is my name as a DJ, producer, and artist, and they will see I produced over 30 singles, 5 albums, and a number of artists. And of course, as Leo Young, I was also a resident DJ in many popular clubs all over Europe.
I was going to say, what was your DJ name? Because I like Linda saying, we were all ravers. I was a raver, and I hope you played hard house music. No, it had to be hard house.
What happened with this? I was one of the people who pioneered house music between 1986 and 1988. When I started the rave scene in 1989, that was the period in which we started to play something a bit more techno, let's say. It was called New Beat. there was new beat, there was some acid house that came in from Chicago and other places, in London. And so then that became more and more techno. And of course, then I played techno in the raves. But during the week or in the after hours, I would play more underground, ambient, melodic tunes, because of course that wasn't the rave. Those were clubs, and so it was a different thing. And then later on, I championed the other styles of music. I created this international cosmic movement, which still goes on to this day. In the middle of the 90s in London, I started working with the Ministry of Sound, which was this important club in London.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I know that well. Ministry of Sound.
With DJ Harvey, I brought him to my house many times, and I explained that my project was to abandon house music in favor of something a bit more eclectic that will include elements of African music, Afro music, like Fela Kuti, things like this, and then mixed with electronic and other things. This was actually something that was done by DJs in the early 80s, late 70s in Italy, known as Afro DJs. And nobody knew about these DJs out of Italy. So I just picked up their tapes, brought them to people like Harvey, and they got shocked about what these people were doing with their mixing, with their equalizing, with what they were doing with these different styles of music, mixing things completely different, like Kraftwerk and Fela Kuti, or things like complete. So from that moment onwards, they got into this. I launched this idea of the cosmic international scene, because this club in Italy that started pioneering this stuff in the early 80s, late 70s was called Cosmic Club. And there was another place called the Bay of Angels in Rimini. And still to this day, currently, it was yesterday, the day before, Beppe Loda, who was actually one of the original DJs of these Afro clubs, sent me a message saying, wow, I found my own tapes at the house of DJ Harvey in Los Angeles. Did you give them to him? And I said, yeah. Wow, that was so inspirational for everybody. I said, well, yeah, I'm no longer a DJ, but I was somebody who inspired the whole scene. I don't find myself, they still call me for DJing in Berlin, in other places around the world, but I don't have the time at the moment, and neither the possibility, because...
Now, I can imagine you being quite a cool DJ. I mean, I can imagine you standing behind your set and grooving with everybody. I mean...
well,
we were ravers of the day, that's for sure.
I think that when I was 35 and I changed my mindset to something, I was of course involved for many years in Masonic activities, in Masonic research, and I started to arrive to the conclusion that I wanted to expose what was wrong in this world, and I started doing that in the fall of 2006. Well, and with the consequences that came after that, because I was accused of espionage, persecuted, all these things that, of course, happened to me. Well, it was a decision that I made that I don't regret, because I think that, a guy like me can have many lives. And so it was a phase of my life which I created a lot of things. And so I have still a collection of over 20,000 records in Europe that are being held there. So one day maybe I can recover, and then I have, or maybe given to a museum, because they represent the whole of house music and not so much more. But it is important to understand that from that moment onwards, I had to leave the music business also for my own security, because the moment I started to expose the New World Order, I would personally not find myself anymore safe in a club. I mean, it would take a second for them to slip a poison or something in a drink. It happened later on. They actually poisoned me during my political activity in Italy. So it would take them a second to do it in a club. So for that reason, I really restricted my club appearance to a minimum until I left Europe in 2019. And now I no longer. But I did, for example, go back to Berlin, where I was resident DJ of Treasure for many years. I went back in 2018, and it was a big success. I went to Estonia to DJ, and I was also guested later on national radio to give a speech also about this subject. So I kind of included both things. And then at the same time, I get called all the time, and I have to say no, because at the moment still it's also a security matter. club is very difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
Club.
So I want to just ask you, and I mean, I know we're kind of like veering off the topic, but it's not really veering off the topic, in my opinion. Was this all organized? Was it all orchestrated, from when you were a little boy in the Vatican reading fairy tales? Do you think you were being groomed by those?
I was definitely being groomed in a certain way to join that elite Vatican Illuminati setup, which eventually I will join, because in 1992-93, while at the height of my DJ career, this friend of my father called me up, invited me in this incredible place. It looked like an office out of a James Bond movie. And I go there, and I remember I knocked this door. I was in Trastevere, where I used to live at the time. And he said, sit down. It was a beautiful office. And he said, well, we noticed you did very well without any help from us. Wow, yeah. And then suddenly he said, because they were impressed. And this was not even the first time that this happened, because already 2 years prior to that, a friend, very influential friend of my grandmother, who had designed the whole underground services, the lines in Rome, he had invited me to dinner and to ask me the very same, to actually ask me a question: how did you manage? 2 years later, though, this friend of my father was a little bit more direct. He said, okay, you did this, and now we're going to give you the possibility to do this, and this. And I was like, well, doesn't sound that bad. And then I was offered to be initiated. And of course, I accepted the offer. But later on, the political situation had changed so much in Italy. The crisis had become so, the fall of the First Republic came with the fall of the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So the whole political scenario was in chaos, not only in Italy, but around the world. And the guy who initiated me, Prince Aliata di Montereale, wanted to actually encourage the restitution of monarchies in the former communist countries, like Romania, for example, and other countries. But he hadn't managed really to convince. I mean, he went to meet Bill Clinton in the early, I think it was 92 or whatever. And then later on, though, because things were changing so much in Italy, they got him involved in a scandal. And because of that, I, who was, of course, just initiated by him in 1993, was strongly suggested to leave Italy. So in 1994, I left Italy because the situation was getting increasingly dangerous for me. However, I had already started doing certain things I describe in my books, The Magic of Abramelin in the Mage. I talk about in volume 3 of my Confession, for example. But I had been also a rebellious child, in the sense that I had viewed all these things, but always with a sense of skepticism. So, but also at the same time of curiosity to see where they will lead me to, understanding that the world was not ruled by the usual people. I remember the first time I found this Masonic document after it was in the 70s, I think late 70s. We were at my grandmother's house in Sicily. My grandfather had died. And I went into his office and opened this thing, and I found this document, which I still have in Italy. I show a copy of it in one of my books, I think volume 2 of my Confessions. And it was his Masonic passport with all his degrees, everything. And I went to my father and said, what is this? And he started to tell me, I mean, it was a little bit difficult, you have a child asking you, what is this, and I was not a stupid child. I was very understanding.
I was going to say you were a very switched on child.
Yeah. So I want to know more about it, more and more. And that, I think, led me also into embracing at the beginning the New World Order project. Right. So I wasn't necessarily groomed but in a way I was.
Yeah.
Because, for example, my grandmother on my English side brought me in 1982. I was only 12 years old in America for the first time. And I was in this very democratic party kind of setup in Rhode Island, which was used to be also a popular residence for the Kennedys, and they had a party with my mother and everything. And she was like, well, we would like to introduce you to certain, because what their intention was to marry me to one of the key American bloodlines later on. So they were grooming me for that.
Right. Wow.
But I didn't really go along with it. I was too rebellious. I will always come up with something that they will find a little bit too over the top, because I will not accept their compromises. And definitely they didn't like when I started working with Russia so much. That was a matter of concern for English Freemasonry that had been initiated into the United Anglo Lodge of England. Julian Rees, who was my mentor in the initiation, but had also been active in intelligence operations in Eastern Germany during the Cold War, started a discipline proceeding against me between 2003 and 2005. And so that led me to understand certain things about the New World Order. And at one point in 2006, that's why I didn't, and plus my experience with the OTO also, which was very negative, which went along with what Julian Rees did, led at the end, pushed me to expose this whole world and start my Confessions of an Illuminati, which later on, of course, as you know, I manifested also through my books, and we are discussing today. So the subject that we are discussing today, which is the secret meeting that has been held on recently in the Vatican, just a few days ago, on the 16th of February 2024. It's part of an experience which I myself was part of, because I was, involved directly with the Vatican. I was involved with Freemasonry. Prince Aliata di Montereale was behind the Ali Akçaa attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II, which was a completely staged thing from the inside, meaning not that John Paul II wasn't shot, because he was shot, but it was orchestrated by people within the Vatican and Freemasonry to then blame Bulgaria, and through Bulgaria, the Soviet Union. So there was something there that I actually had been, having been initiated by Aliata di Montereale, who was the head of the Illuminati of the New World Order at the time. And this is like, people, if they don't know Giovanni Aliata di Montereale, they can just go on the Wikipedia, and they will actually find, surprisingly enough, apart from the fact he was a monarchic party representative in the parliament in Italy with my grandfather, and that's why he probably wanted to initiate me. And he was a friend, the Aliata family are very close friends of my family, both on my father's side and on my mother's side. It's incredible because my mother is English, but my grandmother in the 50s at one point resided also in this palace in Sicily of this important aristocratic family. And so I think that a synchronicity of events brought me to where I am now. But I'm glad I'm still alive, because I think people who have witnessed certain things rarely stay alive.
Right, exactly. Well, we are very happy you're alive too, to tell the story, that's for sure.
At least, I'm alive and kicking until now. I hope I'm going to be alive for a long time. But I've been fighting with a system that has not been very light with me. I've literally had to flee Italy, as you know, in 2019. And all of this while I was also back in Italy in the years preceding that, trying to activate a Christian form of Freemasonry in order to see if there were any Christian Freemasons that could come on our side and join on the good side of the battle against the evil that is taking
Well, now,
over.
what is a Christian Freemason? Because
Yeah.
aren't all Freemasons, or the Brotherhood, really, aren't they all using Christianity as some sort of a front for their dodgy deeds?
I will explain you. Okay, Freemasonry, like we know, in 1717, you have the birth of speculative Freemasonry. The Vatican didn't have initially any problem with Freemasonry until 1738. They actually had a lot of lodges that started to be established within the Vatican.
Right.
The problem, though, arose when Chevalier Rams. I mean, what happened was that the Vatican was utilizing more and more the Knights Templar myth within Freemasonry and the supposed or alleged origins of Freemasonry within the Knights Templar order to their own advantage.
Right.
And this manifested in an order called the Strict Templar Observance, which was created in Germany by a guy called Baron von Hund, and started his activities in Northern Europe with a lot of success around the 1750s. Now, Christian form of Freemasonry basically at that point was shaped because they saw that the other form of Freemasonry, which was generated by the so-called guilds officially, and that's the claim that all of Freemasonry give to the origins nowadays of Freemasonry, the guilds originated Freemasonry and the craft, and rather than the Knights Templars. But the Knights Templar myth is still strong. In fact, then it has taken position in the rites of Freemasonry, mainly the ancient and accepted Scottish rite. However, I am a descendant of Robert the Bruce, who was the protector of the Knights Templars. For that reason, I think I was immediately groomed within Freemasonry to take a high place, because, of course, at that point, they could, with me, have the legitimacy of somebody who could come from a family of such importance. And the fact that my family is the family of the Queen Mother, the family of Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the fact that she was so important for Freemasonry was actually given by her husband when he became king. He was a Freemason himself, and before becoming king, he resigned officially from his official duties as an officer of Freemason, not as a Freemason, but he went and delivered a speech in Great Queen Street in which he said that the family of the Queen Elizabeth II, which is the family of the mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the Queen Mother, had done more to Freemasonry than his family or any other family in England or Great Britain, because the family was from Scotland. So I can say that Christian Freemasonry was possible at the very start of Freemasonry. And that's why that Masonic rite, which, of course, the Strict Templar Observance was built on that claim, was made in a Christian way and didn't oppose anything that Christianity it stands for. However, soon after, Freemasonry got infiltrated, like I explained in volume 9 of my Confessions, by all those mystery schools, including Gnosticism in particular. Gnostic Christianity. They brought in their heresies. On top of that, there was that faction of the Knights Templars that have always been accused of having a very secret relation with Islam, in particular the order of the Assassins, who were used by the Knights Templars as their contract killers, basically, against Sunni Islam. This is a very complex matter, which, of course, I'm not going to delve in now because it will take us a few hours. Yeah. But we can say that Freemasonry was soon infiltrated, and by the time of the union between the ancient and the moderns in 1813 by the Duke of Sussex, which unifies these two factions that have been fighting against each other, at that point, it opened up to non-Christians officially, and it was the moment in which Freemasonry got literally invaded by occultists left, right, and center. But it was already in the 18th century that occultism started to more and more infiltrate Freemasonry, creating also the Egyptian Rite with Cagliostro, and then we had Mesmer, and we had other people. But in particular, we can say that that was the century in which Freemasonry was shaped as we know it today. And so in the 19th century, instead, it became more and more this encompassing umbrella organization of all these, we call them Illuminati, but in reality, there are a number of mystery schools of different extraction. Because, for example, the Sufis of the Middle East are the Illuminati, the Rosicrucians of the West. If we go and study what they both stand for, they more or less stand for the same thing, because in the end, these organizations aim to arrive to a point in which they want to obtain immortality, as I explained very much in this book, and at the same time, they want to create, if possible, on the long run, a one-world religion, which is something they are managing to do now through the Vatican. Now, the Vatican, after the Freemasonry started to become more and more popular and realize the threat that they were for Christianity, because they were, they saw that in reality, they were not really Christians in what they were aiming for. So, rightly so, the Pope started to condemn Freemasonry from that moment onwards. And it started a war between the two factions. A war that, however, after the Second World War, in the 1950s, and with the start at the end of the 1950s, the beginning of the 60s, of the Second Vatican Council, which was this council where they reformulated the whole dogmas of the church, let's say, all the laws of the church were put back into discussion. Well, it was very important for Freemasonry to take control of that meeting. And it wasn't any form of Freemasonry that wanted to take control of that meeting, but was progressive, liberal Freemasonry that had started in France in the 1870s, when the Grand Orient of France no longer required the people who joined Freemasonry to believe in God. And that was the moment in which all the atheists could join the lodges. That was the moment in which the elite that will later on generate also the Soviet Union, all those Russians like Lenin, Trotsky, all those people, they gave birth later on to a form of Freemasonry in 1905 that was the Grand Orient of the Russian people.
And this was all to form this one world religion.
It was the Illuminati in 1776 were a relatively small group, but the ideas that Adam Weishaupt put together about eliminating the religions and eliminating all the monarchies, because usually monarchies are the ones protecting the religions, was an idea that became very popular. And so, regardless of the fact that in the 1870s, then the Order of the Illuminati was eliminated, but then they had to reshape and retransform themselves and represent themselves with other names. That's what Adam Weishaupt said. So just change name, use other names, whatever. The important thing is that we arrive to our objective. The objective is to destroy the Christian religion, but also the others later on. No? So, but this also puts them in an alliance, a strange alliance with certain factions of Islam, because Islam at the same time is a religion that soon after its birth was infiltrated by the Illuminati from Egypt, because the original Illuminati, remember, they always come from Egypt, or even from Atlantis, if you want to go back even more. But Alexandria of Egypt was the birthplace of the real Illuminati. And the Gnostics, for example, and all the other sects. So when we have this situation all-encompassing in which the Illuminati of Egypt want to eliminate Islam. But who are these Illuminati in Egypt? They were not really only Egyptians. They were actually also Persians. In Persia, we had the Zoroastrians, the Manichaeans, all these sects. When Islam was born, they saw as a great opportunity to sabotage, infiltrate this faith, take over, and destroy parts of Christianity, but also destroy whatever was regarded as Sunni Islam. So you see, this is a very complex matter, and that's why I dedicate to these topics books and books on end, because it is
very fascinating. Wow, very fascinating.
Yeah, the Rosicrucians themselves in their manifesto, they said they had been in Fez, in Morocco, basically. Knowledge comes from the Middle East. What kind of knowledge they had? Knowledge about entities that then became, the elementals of Paracelsus, the genies of the Middle Eastern tradition. The meetings that are held now between the Vatican and Freemason in the last week, we have noticed of, are very important, because there have been some failed attempts during the 1970s. I will, by the way, publish an article for all those who are following me in the coming hours on realzagami.com about the subject, about the secret meetings that are recently held between the Vatican and Freemasonry, because they are of great importance to understand certain things about the fact that the failed attempts of the 1970s, there was this Padre Caprile who in the middle of the 70s brought around 400 Freemasons to a secret meeting held in Villa Parioli in a good area of Rome. But the meeting didn't really, give birth to a follow-up because at that time the tension with Freemasonry was palpable, because there was 4 lodges in the Vatican operating, and they didn't really want to have a public discussion with Freemasonry. They wanted to continue what they were doing behind the scenes, controlling the Vatican.
All secret and clandestine, for sure.
It was all about the money. It was about the Vatican
bank.
It was about the faith. Nowadays, things have changed. So what's happening since the 16th of February in Milan is that 3 Italian Grand Lodges. In Italy, you have a variety of Masonic Grand Lodges because of the number of schisms, but there's 3 main Grand Lodges. There is the Grand Orient of Italy, the Gran Loggia d'Italia, the Gran Loggia Regolare d'Italia. The Gran Loggia Regolare d'Italia came into existence in 1993 after my initiation. This schism happened, not because of me, but the schism within Italian Freemasonry that led to the birth of this faction. The English Freemasons didn't want to recognize anymore the Grand Orient of Italy because they were involved with the P2 scandal, basically, this in synthesis. So the fact that now there is this meeting is also because in the last year or so, the Grand Orient of Italy has been again received recognition by the United Grand Lodge of England, together with the Grand. So there is 2 obedience. This is very unusual. There's no country in the world that has 2 obediences, I think, to my knowledge. Maybe they are, but that are recognized, because usually the United Grand Lodge of England has to is the mother lodge of the world, has to recognize 1 obedience. Like, for example, Grand Lodge of South Africa, and that is 1 for the whole territory. You can't have more than 1 Grand Lodge. Then the Grand Lodge has a number of lodges. There can be 1,000 Grand Lodge, little lodges, but the Grand Lodge is 1. So what happens is that this meeting that is happening for the first time in a closed door setup in northern Italy, in Milan, is unprecedented, because there is a guy called Monsignor Mario Enrico Delfini participating to it, that is the current Archbishop of Milan. There is another guy, Bishop Antonio Stagnano, who is being nominated in August 2023, 2022, so not so long ago, not even 2 years ago, by the Pope as the president of the Pontifical Academy of Theology. So he's very close to the Pope. And then you have the infamous Cardinal Francisco Coco Palmiero. Now, why I say infamous? Because the people who have followed my research for many years know that in the summer of 2017, I exposed for the first time worldwide on the Alex Jones show, and that was one of his biggest scoops. He still thanks me for that. That basically I brought to the world the photo of the guy who was caught by a police raid in the palace, what used to be the Inquisition, and they were having a gay orgy with male prostitutes and cocaine, and I exposed them, and later on they were forced, even RT and many other channels later on worldwide, they were forced to actually give this name out, because they were all talking about the fact there had been a police raid in the Palace of the Holy Inquisition, but nobody was saying who was involved. I said, this guy's involved. And I showed the picture worldwide, I remember, to the Alex Jones show, and everybody was like, you know. And after that, LifeSite News, which is another Catholic organization and media organization, not only confirmed that, but they said that, because they said that the Monsignor Luigi Capozzi, which I showed the image, who is the secretary of Coco Palmiero, was there, but also Cardinal Coco Palmiero, the guy who is now participating in this high-level meeting with the Masons, he was also there doing cocaine with the male prostitutes. So at that point, the Pope, of course, was caught off guard, and he had to get Coco Palmiero to the Vatican. In 2018, basically, Coco Palmiero was called by the Pope to resign his position on April 7. And part of it is because I exposed him, and I'm very glad of having done that. But you imagine that didn't give you much time to leave Italy at that point. Had to leave.
Yeah, Italy. That's. I mean, you're dealing with some high level. I would just call them. I mean, you want to call them mafiosos, but I don't think they're
well,
mafiosos.
They are the heads of the mafia.
Okay, well, there we go. Okay, so wow.
So what happened was that I'm not dealing here. I mean, going back, as somebody's talking about Frankie goes to Hollywood.
I was going to say that. Relax.
No, I would say
isn't that quite telling, that song Relax?
Yeah, I would say that my career started with me playing on Sunday evening for Catholic radio, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Relax, and being reprimanded immediately by the bishop, to later on having me exposing the cardinal, who instead is in a gay orgy with us. So, I mean, it's kind of like, it's weird. It has a kind of, I guess that God is kind of humorous, no? So
and God has got a great sense of humor. I have no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
So at that point, what happens is, the Pope got him to become instead President Emeritus, which is still a title. You are President Emeritus. You're a former Pope, but you still have the Emeritus type. But the guy didn't really have a But Coco Palmiero was a member of one of those Masonic lodges within the Vatican. So he was, of course, chosen for being one of the main prelates present in this meeting in Milan. And the crazy thing about it is, at the end of the internal meeting, which was dedicated to the Church Freemasonry relations, the Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Italy said something that I find very controversial, to say the least, because he says, I dream of walking under the light of the great architect of the universe with Pope Francis. Now, that means that you are dreaming of being in a lodge with Pope Francis, in Masonic phrase, because the Masonic...
I was going to say, that sounds a bit like cryptic talk to me.
Yeah. It is cryptic talk. But the other thing is that Coco Palmiero then added to this whole thing, well, I think it's so good. We need to have a permanent table of discussion on this subject, ongoing forever, kind of thing, Permanent table of discussion means that basically now the Vatican is thinking of establishing a permanent organization that it's linking Freemasonry and the Vatican on an ongoing discussions on their future. But why are they doing that? That is very important to understand, because then people will... First of all, we said that there has been a lot of attempts previously made, especially in the 70s. Why? Because the Vatican had already been, in a way, Masonically influenced from the moment in which the first Pope in recent history had been made a Mason, Papa Roncalli. Papa Roncalli then led to Papa Montini. These were all the popes of the was the popes of the Second Vatican Council, and they were all Freemasons. And John Paul II and all these people, all these popes were Freemasons. And when there was one pope who wasn't a Mason, who was Pope John Paul I, he lasted only 33 days, because 33 days he basically saw, I mean, he was given a poison coffee, some say, but he also had a heart attack because he saw one of his cardinals with a Masonic apron in the Vatican, and that was enough for him to really have a heart attack. So
33 days. What again? I mean, why do you think, I mean, that number 33, do you think that
it's very
specific?
Important. Yeah, because we talked about Freemasonry and how it developed. Initially, there wasn't 33 degrees. We said that the 18th century was the century in which all these degrees developed, and so in various systems, and they were all competing with each other. However, out of all this competition, two main systems came to be known: the Royal Arch, that was established in America as the Rite of York Rite, and the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, which established itself in the early 19th century in Charleston, which is basically the current Supreme Council of the ancient accepted Scottish, is the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite with 33 degrees. Now, the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, on the contrary of the York Rite, which maintains a kind of, I prefer it personally, it's more Christian in its approach, while instead there is, with the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, an obvious attempt to start the Gnostic Rosicrucian from the 18th degree. Then you have the Templar element, but the Templar element is present in the York Rite in a different way. In the ancient accepted Scottish Rite is more visible from the 30th degree. The link also with the Assassins is revealed to the initiate. So they are knowledgeable of the fact that they had a special relationship with Islam.
Right.
Now, there are also the Egyptian rites, which bring you up to 100 degree, 99, 100. Now, the Egyptian rites that are not recognized officially here in America, but are recognized officially in Europe, for example, in Russia, they have become a competition for the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, but they were not accepted here in America because the ancient accepted Scottish Rite became the state form of Freemasonry.
Right.
That's why the headquarters is in Washington, D.C. They are just like the Swedish Rite is, for example, the state form of Freemasonry in Scandinavian countries. It is the state form. So here, every valley, I show you, I make an example if I have here, but I don't know. Yeah, I'll show you here. Just to make.
But I also want to just find out, on the subject of little boys. I mean, it has long been rumored and obviously spoken about that all these Catholic priests and things have an absolute lust for little boys. And I'm wondering about this Coco Panero when he was caught with cocaine and
no. The thing is, like in Latin, they have a saying, nomen omen. Nomen omen means for every name. You have at times the manifestation of this name that always manifests. So Cocco Palmiero, which is like Coco in Italy, you say Coco when you talk about cocaine. So Cocco Palmiero is like Palmiero cocaine, no? So the fact that the cardinal has this name, he was almost like from birth.
Right, exactly. But I'm wondering, when did this thing start then with the grooming of the altar boys in the Catholic Church? Because that is, and I'm wondering... But also, were those male prostitutes that they were with, or were these altar boys? No, you know what I'm saying?
In the orgy in the Holy Inquisition palace, the police raided. and of course it was asserted by the police authorities. I'm in contact with my friends in the police who participated, you know, of the Vatican. They are basically in charge of the Italian police on the perimeters of the Vatican. So they are not allowed to investigate inside, but because the whole Inquisition building led to outside, and because there was actually a law being broken also by Italian, even if it was Vatican territory, for some reason they managed to get in and they exposed this whole thing. There wasn't any altar boys, thanks God. There was male prostitutes. Altar boys, though, have been unfortunately taken advantage of, and
yeah, it's a known fact now. It's not even a rumor anymore.
Recently there was a law. I mean, sorry, there was somebody was condemned that I talked about on ZAGAMI.com just a few weeks ago. He was condemned by the Italian law finally for having raped. And this guy was a young priest at the time, but they never usually expose the old cardinals. These always get away with everything. They always get away with everything. I mean, I've tried to expose them over and over again when I was in Italy, and I was the one who was getting into the problem. You know, I was getting the police at my door, not them. that's the big, you know, that's what really led in the end to me leaving Italy. However, Scottish Rite, like we said before, is a rite that is practiced here in America and is very popular in Italy. And I saw that the Jesuits tend to like this rite in particular, because then the other rite, the York Rite, which usually leads to the English system, well, it's more close to the Anglican Church. And so in the past, it was more confrontational with the Jesuits. Nowadays, even the Anglicans have become one with the Catholic Church. So there is no difference. I know that for a fact, because the head of the Anglican Church goes to Rome, and basically he stays in a place. My mother was the head of the British expats, so I know a lot of inside info on that. So basically now with the Pope, they are basically one thing. The Anglican Church is no longer the church it used to be. And that's why the King Charles, which is the head.
I want to also talk about the audition room at the Vatican. I mean, when you look at it, it looks, you can see it's like the head of the serpent.
No, but let's not forget, before we go there, let's not forget the fact that the Anglican Church the head of the Anglican Church is the King of England or the Queen of England.
Yeah, that's
they
true.
Are the head of British Freemasonry, so they have the same head. The Anglican Church is basically with Freemasonry one thing.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not like there is difference here. So just to say that, regarding what you said about the snake, of course, the head of the snake is in the Vatican. I mean, the snake, meaning the Satan, symbolized in that temptation of the apple, but it is also symbolized, like you said, in the main hall where the Vatican.
Is that why they have it there? Is that actually the reason why they'll tell you they have it there? Is that because of the temptation of the apple? Is that why?
They don't give any official explanation about the design of that building. They didn't. They never even bother. The Vatican doesn't give you any answers. If you go and ask them, they don't give you any answer. But I remember one thing about this happened to me 10 years ago. And I was participating to the Pitchfork insurrection in Italy, and we were invited to the Vatican. At one point, I remember I was talking with this Jesuit representative and this other Dominican representative in front of the Jesuit headquarters. And suddenly the Jesuit said, well, and she was actually a woman, but a sister, they have nuns who work for the Jesuit. And she's very high up and works with the Jesuit general. And she was like, but Leo, why you are a Freemason? And I said, and at that point, I said, listen, your hypocrisy is out of norm. I pointed exactly where the lodges were in the Vatican. I said, go there and you will find my Freemason colleagues right there. So what are you talking about, bunch of you? oh, sorry, we didn't want to upset you. Oh, we didn't know. And I said, well, fuck off. I mean, it was just like, why are you being a bunch of hypocrites? You have 4 lodges in the Vatican and you're talking to me about being a Freemason. I said, you are just a bunch of hypocrites. So that is also the thing. I was myself a participant to the meeting between all Freemasons in 2004 in London, Many Faiths, One Brotherhood, in which there were Vatican representatives, and there was the cousin of the Queen, Lord Helgin, the Grand Master of the Order of Scotland, and many others. And I had the honor of being there. It was in the Canterbury Masonic Research Center in Canterbury Tower. And even there, I had to say, this is hypocritical what you're doing here, because you're talking about the differences, the criticism, this and that, when then you have Masonic lodges in the Vatican. So what are you talking about?
Exactly.
You know, you are there basically, even last year, saying the Freemasons are excommunicated by the Vatican. They are, but then can you still be? So that is what is happening now, I think. They know that they have been exposed with their incestuous relationship between Vatican and Freemasonry. And now they're doing these meetings because also, let's not forget, the Pope himself, Pope Francis, has been exposed as a Freemason. He's been exposed as a Freemason by a liberal Freemason, Juan Battista Tata Joffre, who is an Argentinian journalist and writer, who was, though, a former politician, a journalist, but also an Argentinian secretary for the intelligence between 1989 and 90 in the early part of Carlos, I think, Menem presidency. So he, you know, he's a reliable source. He's not just a journalist. He's a guy who was in charge of the intelligence in Argentina, the place where the Pope comes from. And he's telling us that the Pope is a Freemason. So, you know, that's it. So the fact that the meetings, I think, that are instead taking place have to be understood under this context. The society, today's society, is quickly being transformed by artificial intelligence. The subject of artificial intelligence increasingly discussed, as I also explained in Volume 9, in Freemasonry.
Right.
It has taken a very important position also in the Vatican, that has led Pope Francis to nominate a Jesuit special group for Silicon Valley, headed by an eminent Jesuit who works for him. So what they're doing here is, as the Pope, and this I explained in Volume 7, you remember Volume 7, we discussed in the past Volume 7. Volume 7, I explained how Freemason and the Vatican are actively working for the last few years to put together this one world religion. Now, though, they have to work also on the Cyber Satan artificial intelligence project together. And so they need to set aside the differences even publicly, because we all know that in private, in there, they have been settling the differences for a long time, because as long as the money, they don't care if you are a Freemason, you could be worshipping a can of Coke, they don't care. But this is about the future of mankind. And their interest is to mold and create and establish the transhumanist world of tomorrow. And that's why, like I explained in Volume 9, and I start explaining also in Volume 6.66, the subject of Cyber Satan, with Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, this very important Jesuit. The Jesuits find themselves today with the Pope in the position of power, and they want to not only stay in power, but they want to also help this repacification with Freemasonry to then establish a joint group that can create the basis for the Cyber Satan takeover of 2030. So this is what is really happening here.
You can just see how this process has begun. And, if you're going right back to what you're explaining, it started off with Christian Freemasonry, right? And again, but, that just shows me how...
You see, when you say started Christian Freemasonry, you have to remember that Reverend Anderson, who laid the constitutions, made initially this fraternity because England had been torn apart by wars of religions between Christians.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so Freemasonry was cleverly, let's say, put together at the time to simply put Protestant, Catholic, every form of Christian, that, of course, like I said, led to a confrontation that pushed even the first Puritans to come here to America. So, I mean, the confrontation was the War of the Roses and everything else. So, the establishment of Freemasonry was initially to bring back a pacification between the Christians. And so it was Christians. But when Christianity was no longer the subject of confrontation, because all the Christian factions were getting along with each other, then they had to go to the next phase. So then they, after 1813, said, okay, now all the religions, especially with the expansions of the expansion of the British Empire, forced them into this decision, because you had to include, of course, from the very early moments of Freemasonry already, the Indians in it. The Indians had to open a lodge, of course, and then the Sikh, then the Hindus had to open their own lodges, like the Islamic, the Muslims had to open their own lodges. And this brought Freemasonry to become more and more a basis, ideal experimental ground for a one-world religion. That's the main...
Absolutely. And it's so true that, because you can see how from the beginning, and I mean, if we look at the initial stages of, initial birthing process of Christianity, it's been the greatest bloodshed religion. The greatest wars, have been fought in Christian religion, or sect, shall we say, sects. So it's easy to use something like that when you're clever and smart, like these guys have been, to manipulate.
First of all, let's say this. The secret societies have been created, of course, the first secret societies in the Middle East, as we know them.
Yeah, exactly. The Dutch East India Company, when you look at South Africa, they arrived here, the DEIC, or the East India Company, EIC, right? Mm. And that's really what I believe, that's the root of the underbelly of the satanic, disgusting system that has rooted itself and taken seed all over the world. It comes from the EIC, East India Company. And of course, what happened in South Africa when Jan van Riebeeck arrived here on the 2nd of April in 1652, he was supposedly trading spices and en route for the Dutch East India Company.
But all those companies, as you know, in London were all Masonic. They were all
exactly.
East India Company is like saying the United the Grand Lodge of England, whatever it was at the time. So the East India Company is not only a colonial per se idea of something that it was British and that was dissolved eventually in 1874 and that came into being around the 1600s. It is something more, because it is in that way that's why Freemasonry in England likes to point their origins to the guilds and to the companies that established them, that we can include also companies like the East India Company. So the fact that the merchants of London trading abroad were part of this whole thing. And even before, let's remember that Freemasonry wasn't born in 1717. It was born a long time before.
Yeah.
But in 1717, they simply put together many little lodges into one grand lodge. That's the birth of speculative Freemasonry, official birth. But before then, there were a lot of small lodges, and each company of merchants had their own lodge or their own thing going on. So then it was just formally worked out in a way in 1717. But you know, when you are including the basic commodities of the time, cotton, silk, sugar, spices, tea, of course, fundamentally, you know, when you go, tea in England is an institution by appointment of Her Majesty. It's an institution, the tea company. They will go and wage war and kill people for tea. Of course, people today will laugh about it, but it's nothing to laugh. And of course, South Africa was a product of this colonization and also this expansion of the Freemasonry. Recognize itself as being born from secret societies in the Middle East, but at the same time, they wanted to avoid the connection with the Middle East. So when from the 1850s, certain historians started to publish works in English saying, listen, Freemasonry comes from Syria, comes from Egypt, comes from sects like the Druzes, like the Assassins, and there is these connections with these groups, and why these connections were plausible. And actually, well, they try to at least publicly say that this discussion was not a valid one, that no, Freemasonry is our thing. We created it here in Europe. It's all, you know. But in reality, what happened was that back in the days, before the Crusades even started, the Vatican sent to the Middle East what will become the future Crusaders to test the ground, see what was happening before taking over the shore. So they tested the ground, and they started to see that one thing that there was these secret societies, and they were very powerful. They were fierce. They would kill you. They were bound by really tight, by these oaths. And they said, wow, we like that. We need to bring this back to Europe. This is working. Because the European idea initially, you know, they had this romantic chevalier idea, the knights, with a horse, a thing, the dame, and the whole thing. But when you arrive to the Middle East, then they realized it was a little bit more complex down there. So after that first thing, they went back to Jerusalem and they founded the Knights Templars. And the Knights Templars were inspired mainly by the Order of the Assassins. Now, they will never tell you that in history books. Nowadays, some historians say that openly more and more because evidence has come out to prove that. But they basically based the whole system on them. And then that system was in turn, you know, Templars were using Masons, they were not free, simply Masons, operative Masons, to construct those churches.
Right, exactly.
Of those secrets that they had acquired in the Middle East.
Oh, so, how frustrating. You know, when we look back, it's just so frustrating to see that we've been so badly conned, you know, and it's just annoying. That's just annoying.
I don't think it's even a con here. It's not even a con. It's just the way the things work, because simply 90% of the population in old times was kept in the darkness. They were not given at times even the opportunity to read or write, because simply they didn't give them the opportunity to study in their school. Once you go in the schools, that's where the manipulation starts.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. It's like there were those few people, the few influential people, even like today, you know, we talk about the 1% that rules the world. And even back then, it was these few influential ones that had money, power, influence, and they literally knew. It's like they knew. It's like they can smell out the corruption. They knew who they could corrupt.
But
They
the
knew who they could
difference,
join.
I guess, between us and them is that today, if we want, we can have the same kind of knowledge if we are smart enough. We can actually open a book and we can open the internet.
Exactly.
The problem is that today, though, with that knowledge, we can't start a revolution.
Right.
A revolutionary idea 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago will change the world. Nowadays, if I go out and give a revolutionary idea, yeah, well, maybe I can convince my neighbor, but that's about it.
Exactly. I mean, I was just saying the other day, we need a Spartacus in the world right now, right?
Yeah,
the uprising of the slaves.
The world is rigged to a system in which, first of all, they want to see the money. And this is typically represented today by American politics. Now, American politics is, of course, the most democratic form of politics in the world, because in other parts of the world, you don't even arrive to that. I mean, it's all rigged. But in America, you can eventually candidate yourself to the presidency, even an ordinary folk. But he will not be able to arrive to any form of public attention or to the primaries of any party if he doesn't have billions. I'm talking billions, not millions, billions. So the system is rigged.
Totally. Always has been, yeah.
No, but now it's rigged also to the ideas. It wasn't rigged to the ideas 100 years ago. 100 years ago, you might still be able to come up with an idea and change things. Nowadays, you can come up with all kinds of ideas on the internet. There's all kinds of crazy people. Anything can be said, but nothing is true anymore. And that is what they wanted from the start. And now I'm going to explain you why. In this idea of secret societies, we go back to Asani Sabah, the old man of the mountain, who say was, everything is permitted, nothing is true. So the fact that nothing is true anymore, everything is permitted, and that basically we had the 9/11 mega ritual done on the world with a guy, George W. Bush, doing the pet goat ritual in the children in the school there in Saratoga, in Florida, with the book there upside down, whatever, the whole thing. But
yeah, the 9/11.
It was the 9/11 mega ritual that really symbolizes the beginning of this new world order that we are living, unfortunately, today. Now, the Vatican is part of this problem with, of course, Freemasonry. Let's not forget, for example, that George H. Bush, the father of George W. Bush, was a Freemason, that he took his oath of office on the Bible, Masonic Bible, that was used also by George W. Washington, and that the son, George W. Bush, didn't use the same Bible only because of bad weather forced him to use a family Bible, because that one was not available. So they had, of course, the Bushes are also bonesmen from the Skull and Bones, which is also another important group within the Illuminati setup. The old Bush was also a Scottish Rite Freemason. He knew very well about the Assassins. And so Muhammad Atta and his group of crooks became the heirs of the modern Assassins. And they were not the classical Muslims. But the problem here is to define what a classical Muslim is, because in my long research of this whole thing called Islam, in the end, I have arrived to the idea that maybe Muhammad has certain ideas about some kind of Islam, but it was all in his head, because it was never peaceful. After his death, it manifested in hundreds of assassinations and even between family members. So the fact that Islam is a tool it has to be accepted even by Muslims that might, of course, think about what I'm saying as an insult, but it's not an insult. You might be a pious Muslim. You might idealistically believe it's a religion of peace. Maximum respect to you. But then we have to go into the research of this religion of peace, as well as the Christians think Christianity is a religion of peace. I'm not saying that only Islam is to be condemned, because then we have the Vatican, who is simply another manifestation of evil in what they have done.
Exactly.
So then you have, when it comes to the Jewish people, then the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, and you have all the various twists and turns of that we still see in the Middle East. So religions, unfortunately, have been hijacked always by man. And,
exactly.
And the institutions that make those religions have always been corrupt. So when they tell you, what denomination are you today? You used to be Catholic. And I'm like watching them. I'm like, you still believe in denominations? Are you still at the level of denominations? That means that you're really still in a cage, that you're still in the matrix. Now, I'm not saying here that means going out of the matrix, meaning not believing in God or not believing in Christianity.
Big difference,
Because
a believer and a religious nut are two different things.
Yeah, because then that is a really tricky thing that is used by the New Agers to push people towards the mystifying religion in turn to make their own religion, and I don't like that. So I will never push that kind of idea. I still believe, I was born a Catholic, it's part of my tradition. It's like, you're born in a race that has that tradition and you want to pursue it. However, the Pope today is a fraud, and I can openly say that. And I hope that they will excommunicate me. They didn't, because actually, when many years after, this happened approximately 15 years ago, I was in Italy participating by chance. There was this church, one of the first churches in the world, because it was constructed where the villa of the mother of Constantine, the emperor who approved Christianity as the religion. So this is a very important church. It's the church of Santa Croce in Jerusalem. And I used to live near there, and they was doing this unprecedented event about bringing together religions and faiths and whatever. And they had done a 24-hour prayer thing. And so I went there to see what it was all about. And I was there, and there was a lot of media, journalists and stuff. So I sit down with the media, and suddenly, who comes? The old priest comes, my friend Don Mario Pieracci, Monsignor Mario Pieracci, the guy who launched me when I was a kid, and he recognized me. So he comes there, and he's like, Leo. And I was, oh, hi, Don Mario. And all the journalists who knew, because at that point, I had already started exposing the Vatican for 3 years. So it was like, so they were like, oh, what is this priest talking with Leo? I'm so friendly. So don't you know who is this guy? They were like telling him, said, don't you think that he should be excommunicated? And so he said, well, you come down here because Leo is born within the Catholic Church. We recognize he is an original. And at that point, when he said that I'm an original, I turned to the judge and said, and I turned to the Mario also, and I was like, well, I like that. The last original was crucified 2,000 years ago, so I'm kind of good company there. It was like this immense laugh in the church. So it was kind of entertaining. Then after, I think, a few minutes or half an hour, they had a technical problem on the mixer desk of the thing, and they actually called me to solve it, which I did. So it was an entertaining evening, nevertheless. When I was myself to being excommunicated, the guy said, but he was born in the womb of the Catholic Church. he's an original. I mean, being original, okay, I'm an original. So that's it. I couldn't
Well,
define
I think that's wonderful that you're an original. So you kind of you know everything about them. It's like having that original imprint, right?
Yeah.
And
when I went to the Pope, I mean, I went to the Vatican. I went to confront myself to the Pope for political reasons during the Pitchfork. It's the thing is that the Vatican with me, they actually read my books. And they are my number one fans. All the portiers, all the people, they read and they tell me. And they're like, they like to read your books here in the Vatican. And I'm like, whatever.
No one's sitting there in the dark with the torch reading your book.
Here, like they're reading some forbidden. That's great. So I kind of enjoy this status in but like somebody said here in the chat, man will never be free until Christ returns. And so I think that I'm a firm believer in the return of Jesus, and I'm a firm believer in Christianity, but I'm also a firm believer in Judaism, because I know that Jesus was also Jew. So those people who, deny the Jews a place in heaven, or anti-Semites because they say he was in some way condemned also by the Jews, not only by the Romans. Well, I say to them, in any case, Rabbi Jesus lived by the tenets of Judaism, because such thing as Christianity didn't exist at the time. And if we go and study the very origins of the church, we know that these two separate branches started to emerge, and one was the Church of James, the brother of Jesus. The other one, of course, was the Church of St. Paul, the future St. Paul, which, of course, never even met Jesus. And that is a little bit controversial. But I think that in the end, God is to be found in our own heart. And that is the main place where you have to find him, regardless of all these denominations.
I so agree. I think, and unfortunately, what I believe is that, because, as you say, religion has been used and in so many ways to divide people and get people fighting. I mean, the greatest wars on this planet have been fought in the name of some religion. Someone, because my God says that, your God says that, I'm this one. We are all God's chosen people. If you are on this earth and you are living and you are breathing and you have a heart that is good, you are God's chosen person to do whatever your task is, And I think the sooner we get out of the notion that there's one religion or one sect or one whatever it might be that is more superior to the other, that's where we as human beings fail ourselves. We have to realize God lives in the heart of each and every one of us. God lives within every cell of your body. We are all created in the image of God. It is up to us to unlock that knowledge within us. And through our actions, we will then, live that. And then we become that. And that's where, we're all saying, the only way we're going to change this world right now is when we, as the people, wake up to that knowledge, right? That's when this world is going to change. That's when they're going to stop duping us. They're going to stop turning us into their dumb energy batteries or whatever it is.
A little bit like in recent times, we have seen the creation of the Iran regime that took place after the fall of the Shah, no? And these Ayatollahs came into place with Khomeini. And everybody now is like, you see this resurgence of the Shiites, and they go in the streets and they hate Israel. It's all about hating Israel. But having said that, the mix between Islam and communism went on and experimented in the 70s, late 60s, that then gave birth to this revolution, that is the Iran Revolution, Well, in the end, it was an Illuminati revolution, guys. And if you fall in a dupe for that, you are a bunch of idiots, even in Iran, who follow these ayatollahs who are the product of the Illuminati. So this is just ridiculous. I touched myself. The same thing for the Opus Dei people who are there trashing themselves and hurting themselves because they think they will then achieve I don't know what with God. I think that God punishes us, of course, daily if we are not in line maybe with his thoughts, but that's obvious. It's
because when we are not in line with God's when we're not in line with God's will, we get shown that very quickly. We do get kind of like a slap across the ear type thing, right? But it's up to us. And I actually like what Kerry was saying. That's because most religions teach that God kills, and God does not kill. God does not want blood. God does not want any of that nonsense. God wants us to live a life of joyfulness and to live a life of love. God is love. God is love, and we are created in love.
The problem is that man is not all about love, and unfortunately hate, jealousy, and all the rest create the
that's up to us to change it.
The confrontation that ends up with one guy maybe murdering the other. Definitely we as a race still have a lot to learn before we can evolve to the next stage. And definitely we don't need the help of cyber Satan to tell us what to do, because at that point we are no longer free of choosing where we want to go. We are dictated where we're gonna be going. So that is really but that's up to us until now. Who knows that in 10 years from now, once the transhumanist takeover starts taking place,
then we might wake up.
A part of us are going to wake up. Unfortunately, I think the majority of us will be lining up for getting the latest computer brain interface from Elon Musk or whatever other diablerie on offer.
Exactly.
So, I of course found our discussions every month very challenging and also very constructive for our viewers, because they give us the possibility of discussing these topics. And I think that people need to find also reassurance that they're not left alone in the darkness there without understanding what is going on. We try to shed a light. I think we did it today also quite well. I think this topic.
Absolutely. And I really, at the end of the day, I believe that I've always maintained we are created in the image of God. It's up to us to know that. We are always forgiven for our transgressions, no matter what they are. It's up to us to accept that and live that, and most of us, it's our own human guilt. It's our own human shortcomings that don't believe that or carry this guilt or fears or whatever it is. We stop ourselves from becoming enlightened, and that keeps us enslaved. As long as we believe that God kills, God punishes us, God will not forgive us, that's our own human shortcoming. The minute we realize we are forgiven, but then we have to live in accordance with that forgiveness. It's about taking responsibility and changing the way we do things. And that's where we as human beings slip up. And God knows our shortcomings. God created us. God will always forgive us. When it's like you're seeing your child learning how to walk. Some children can walk properly at 9 months old, and others maybe only start walking at 18 months old. God doesn't condemn the child that starts walking at 18 months old. He'll say, come, my child, get up. Come, here's my hand. Here's my hand. We as human beings have these judgmental ideas about who and what God is. And I, in my practice for more than 20 years as a healer, have seen how when we believe that, when we understand the power that is God that lives within us, and we unlock that, your body heals itself. Your mind heals itself. I've worked with many people over the years that have healed through incurable diseases. But only when they've realized that the alignment is with God, their creator, and that the body and themselves, when aligned with that, anything is possible. And it's beautiful. You don't have to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or anything. That's your choice to be those things. And if you live them in a beautiful way, that is amazing. But that is not a prerequisite to be a good person.
Well, I still, though, support the idea that a possible Messiah or a return of Jesus for the Christians, or a figure that in some way is being addressed by the ancient prophets, world religion starters, and all the others who have put through the knowledge that in these times we will receive a special reflection of God that might help us all. Well, I believe in that. And I hope that manifests as soon as possible for the benefit of mankind. And I think that will happen, though, like you said just earlier, when the transhumanist takeover is taking place, because that is the moment, I think, that really will lead God to give us a hand. Even more,
exactly,
in a more personal way, let's say. And so Jesus fits in all this for the Christians, of course, but for other religions they can interpret him as they wish. But of course the Illuminati, they know that, and that's why they are working behind the scenes for the creation of one world religion that might manifest instead with an antichrist rather than a false messianic figure that they might craft for us, that will, in some way propose all kind of wonders to us. But we will not fall for that. We will have to be able to discern and understand who is the real Jesus, the real Messiah, who comes back and who gives us that light.
Exactly. And that each person, through prayer, faith, discernment, will figure out for themselves. You can have so much guidance and you can lend your ears to everyone out there. At the end of the day, we've seen
false prophets is something that they warned us about also in the New Testament.
So many false prophets and so much nonsense has been spoken over the years, and people have taken all of that into and made it their truth, and it's really left them shattered and really not really helpful at the end of the day. The only time you're going to realize what is truth is when you go into your own heart and you listen to your heart, because that's where God lives. And you know what I'm saying? It's like when you listen to that, you align with that, you know what is truth. And for different people, it's different things. We can't just say that it's one thing. That's not one size fits all. Every person is different. Every person is going to vibrate. We all created from frequency, sound, and vibration.
The subject of today, the second meeting held between the Vatican and Freemasonry, can be definitely analyzed in the context of the coming Great Deception, where they will also like to be duped with a fake Messiah, with a fake religion generated by the AI, and with a fake God, which is the cyber Satan. So keeping that in mind, we will, of course, meet up next month with a new topic for our viewers. I highly recommend, of course, for today's discussion, these two books, because they include the subjects that we have discussed.
What is that? ZAGAMI volume what? We're looking at volume 9?
For the One World Religion and Freemasonry, and volume 9, of course, regarding, of course, all the subjects we have discussed today with the Gnostics and the Illuminati, and, of course, the rising of cyber Satan. Because these two books, together with volume 6.66, are part of a trilogy which encompasses really the definition of cyber Satan, which I started with volume 6.66, the evil side of artificial intelligence, of this transhumanist takeover.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is
and I think
important.
I think it's amazing, although I do believe, technology is also good. Without technology, we would not be able to sit and have these conversations.
It's a very
So
good
there's a lot of good in that as well.
Until you don't arrive to this kind of technology. And I think that the cinema of the 1920s in Germany with Metropolis gave us the perfect idea of what happens with the robots that we are generating, and the control over mankind that itself is becoming more and more robotic. So I hope that
Absolutely.
we can, with our show, at least help people, give some hope, because they will increasingly become hopeless. The more this technology is pushed on us, the more a lot of people will unfortunately become hopeless. And they will probably, a lot of them, think about suicide even, or they will think of simply becoming conformist, meaning they will say, okay, I will conform because I don't want to have problems. I don't want to have my bank account cleared up, or my credit score system in the of the future maybe giving me the wrong judgment, so I can't take the plane anymore, or I can't have a certain number of trips a year that I would be allowed under my new green autonomy status. I mean, it's just
exactly. We've got to stop
we
being under the
figure out more things next month. I'm sure that we will have more interest.
We will.
And God bless you guys.
Yeah, God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us, Leo. It's always having a pleasure. It's always a pleasure having you on the chat, on the channel. So thank you so much. Always very interesting. Thank you to everybody in the chat. It's always wonderful to have you there as well, where we can connect with you guys, and love the interaction. Intelligent viewers we have. Everyone
I know that we have a lot of people follow us live, but I know that we have even more people following us in the coming days. So I hope that this video will reach more people as possible, because I think really today we have touched on certain topics that are of relevance for everybody.
Very, very much so. Okay, everybody, God bless you. Take good care of yourselves. Have a beautiful weekend. And I wish for you everything that is wonderful, wonderful health, lots of abundance, as much as what you can handle. And yeah, for you and yours. And again, I want to just say thank you to our Patreons, and for everyone who supports this channel. I really, really, really appreciate you so much. Have a beautiful weekend, and we'll see you next week. Cherry buys.